So we are live. Sarah, are we live?
Yes, we are live.
So welcome back. Welcome back to our afternoon session, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed the morning session so far. So we do have some feedback already from our design thinker, but we will have Eddie back at some point. He hasn't joined the call just yet. So we are going to dive straight away into the afternoon session. I am going to wait for another maybe 5 minutes for everyone to get onto YouTube, because we really don't want to miss this call. Alejandro, maybe you want to mute yourself now. Yeah. Fantastic. So welcome back. This is a really important session of the day, and I know you are going to have quite a number of ethics speakers speak about ethics and various aspects of ethics. So this one is a very introductory talk, and it will just give you an overview of what is really happening within the space of ethics and why it's really important to consider the implications of whatever it is that you're building. And so today we have our advisor and a great friend of mine and somebody who has been with Teams in AI since the very beginning. So he knows our journey and he has delivered quite a number of workshops and talks. And whenever I ask him to do this, he always finds the time. So I'm really grateful, Alejandro, that you are joining us again this time. So Alejandro, say hello, just so I know you can hear me and I can hear you.
I can hear you. Hello, and yeah, always certainly a pleasure to be part of this amazing initiative.
So I want to check whether everyone can hear us very well. Sarah, is the output and the sound okay? I will ask Alejandro to project your voice so that everyone can hear you well. So Alejandro, you have been in this course since 11 a.m. today. What are your thoughts? What have you seen?
Oh, I think it's amazing. The momentum in the Discord and the different communication channels is incredible. And you know, as I said, I think this is one of the, if not the most important initiative in the AI space. I'm quite excited to see what all of these young innovators come up with by the end.
Did I tell you we have over 60 cities across the world represented? So there are people from Mexico, so there would be your neighbors.
Amazing.
There are people from Mexico, from Bolivia, from United States, from Italy, from France, from so many different countries joining us. So I hope everyone has joined by now, because this is probably one of the most important talks in 9 days. It's going to give you an overview, and it's just going to be a fantastic introduction to the ethics and all this space. So Alejandro, whenever you're ready, we're ready for you, and I'm going to mute myself here as well. And I will see your video.
Perfect.
And we are going to record this video. All right.
Perfect. And can you see my screen? I have shared my screen now as well.
Yeah, everything's good. Everything's recorded and everything.
Perfect.
Awesome. Amazing. So let's get started, shall we? And thank you so much, Elena and Sarah and the whole team. I can see that some people have been mentioning that my audio is a little bit fuzzy. I decided to actually join via phone while still I share via the internet, just to make sure that we don't have any technical difficulties. So that would sacrifice a little bit of the audio quality, but hopefully you'll still be able to hear me perfectly. So let's dive straight into it. Thank you everybody for joining. I'm really excited to dive into a practical guide towards responsible AI. I'm going to cover a lot of different things, so hold your seats. We're going to cover a lot of really interesting topics. And of course, we're going to be, and I'm going to be present throughout the entire session. So I think if you have any questions, I'm on the Discord, and I'm going to be able to answer any specific questions. So specifically in terms of myself, my background is primarily as a practitioner. I have primarily been in various different software engineering hands-on roles, as well as leadership. Right now, I am one of the engineering directors at Selden Technologies, as well as the chief scientist at the Institute for Ethical AI and Machine Learning. The Institute for Ethical AI is a research center that focuses primarily in highly technical research and primarily builds upon standards to ensure the responsible development of AI and machine learning. And we are part of this organization called the Linux Foundation, as well as contributing to various different other initiatives that ensure the responsible development of AI. Also, the company that I'm currently working on, Selden, primarily has a open source machine learning framework that is currently used with over 2 million downloads to be able to deploy and productionize machine learning models across various use cases, across very different set of industries. Before I actually dive in, I do have some small requests. I have some action points that I want all of the attendees to do. I want to remind you all that mentors are here to help. Remember that you can actually bother us and you can actually ask for as much as we can throughout the entire time that we're here. So please do ask for questions. Please do send us direct messages. I have seen already a few of you that have done that, but this is an opportunity to really just ask questions and interact. Remember that the technology part is also only a small piece of the puzzle and the solution. So make sure that you take that into account as you build those solutions forward. And this is a core thing. Make sure that whilst you're building your solution, you try to identify what is the minimum amount of things that you can build during this very short period of time that will allow you to showcase your vision. Because that's what it's all about in this very short amount of time, is for you to identify the things that can allow you to showcase that vision. And the most important one is, please remember to have fun and learn, right? So you're actually spending your weekend to go through this. The least that you can do is to ensure that you're having fun, that you're making sure that you're meeting as many people and learning as much as possible. So let's dive straight into it. And there's specific one thing that, probably has been mentioned a few times. The challenge that we're facing with COVID is a challenge, if not the biggest of our generation. It's having massive societal impacts in terms of the people that it's affecting, not only from a physical perspective, but also from a mental health perspective and from a long-lasting impact. This is also having an economic impact across various different sectors. This is affecting things like travel, retail, to the point where projections are showing massive amounts of costs. Long story short, I don't need to emphasize and to just put into words the fact that it's such a big challenge. But one of the things to remember, and this is a very interesting piece, that this could potentially not be the last and biggest of the challenges that we'll have to face in this generation. One of the interesting metrics that has come out is that the impact that COVID has had in industries and travel in terms of carbon emissions specifically has shown that this is the level of push, of course, not to the same rate because the rate of decrease is very, very big, but it just shows how big this challenge of carbon emissions is in order for us to be able to stay in track with the required targets. So it is important to make sure that, yes, it's a massive challenge and we're tackling it, but all of the implications that come with it are also long-lasting, not only from this perspective. And of course, we are in this Teams and AI event with the promise of AI. We believe that AI has a massive potential to be able to have a lot of impact in the current challenges that people are facing in their day-to-day life. One of the things that, again, it doesn't need re-emphasis, that AI has increased in growth, in adoption in industry and in solutions. So that is, preaching to the choir because you guys are here with that premise in mind. But one of the things that is very, very important to remember is that if you're running around with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And in the whole sort of like a spectrum of problems in the world, and the subset of relevant solutions, only a very small percent, well, not very small percentage, but only a percentage of that is tech-specific solutions. And from that, a smaller percentage even is AI solutions. So it's important to make sure that there is that level of approach to ensure we can use the technology to change the world, but at the same time, there's a lot of emphasis that needs to be put to understand what are the real challenges that actually need AI to be solved, and not other challenges that are actually just, perhaps, a bunch of if statements, or more specifically, not even an app, right, can solve. So that's actually quite key. And the reason why that's very important is because the impact of a bad solution can have worse repercussions than no solution at all, right? And that's a very, very important thing to emphasize, not in the context of this hackathon, of course, but in the context of a solution that is deployed across thousands of people. And we're starting to see cases where that will be the case, like with the contact tracing apps, like with the dashboards that the National Health Service are building in this country and other countries. The access to this data, of course, will be critical and will be urgent, but it's not about urgency versus best practice, but it's urgency and best practice. It's how do you make sure that you follow best practices around this specific use case. And the piece around here, and I mentioned a few of the challenges, deep fakes. You have seen algorithmic bias, adversarial attacks, mass surveillance. I could go into a 60 to 3-hour workshop on each of these topics and even more. But of course, this doesn't need even an emphasis, as if there is full awareness of the challenges of that. And even on top of that, the complexity of machine learning as a technology introduces a lot of things that we hadn't had to deal before. The challenge of specialized hardware, of complex computational graphs, the challenges of compliance to make sure that you have the audit trails or the accountability processes behind that. And the ability to reproduce something, right? If you have a solution and you say, hey, this is something that I feel could actually help society, and it works in a petri dish, but if you deploy it into the real world, you need to make sure that the ability to have that reproducibility of both production level and experiment, is quite critical. And as I have emphasized a couple of times, it's key to go beyond the algorithms, right? When it comes to AI, the machine learning and the artificial intelligence piece is only a small subset of the pieces that are required to address a problem. This is basically the intersection of the machine learning expertise, but also the industry domain expertise, the policy expertise, the industry standards. And this requires, as much as it needs the researchers and the technologists, as it does for the designers, the people with the different business skills, and even with the social sciences, all over the whole spectrum, right? And this cross-sector collaboration is what allows for real solutions to come forward. And the key thing here to also remember is that this is not just an approach where you can say, I am going to follow the high-level principles, guidelines, and then automatically everything gets resolved, right? Because ultimately, it's about making sure that you have the right high-level ethical principles or the right level of high-level approaches to the problem, but it's equally critical to make sure that the underlying engine, the underlying technology has the infrastructure or the capabilities in place to make sure that reality matches expectation, right? Because we can have long 2-hour discussions about how we all agree that doing harm is bad, how we all agree that that algorithmic bias is bad. But the reality is that until we can actually build the underlying solutions that can make sure that reality matches expectation, we're not going to be able to fulfill these challenges. So it's an end-to-end problem where it starts with the right initial principles, but then it has to be reflected around the best practices. And then there's also the question that comes in. We have hosted a lot of discussions in this topic, which has been massively fascinating. The question of whose ethics, right? A lot of the times we mention, okay, well, you need to make sure that you talk about ethics and that you introduce the best practices and principles by design. but then it still has the question of, which underlying philosophical foundations are being followed, right? Because when it comes to different societies, these societies have tens of thousands of years of human history before this last, 20 years or the last few generations. And these tens of thousands of years of foundational knowledge have actually built cultures and societies how they are now. One thing to make sure that it's worth emphasizing is that the philosophical foundations of a culture or a nation do not reflect one-to-one the political state of the country itself, right? I mean, that's one of the things to bear in mind. But understanding those underlying knowledge foundations allows people to empathize much better, to see where the other people are coming from, and then being able to have much more productive discussions. And the way that we have approached it with the work that we have done at the Institute is by taking that top-bottom approach, or that bottom-up approach as well. And we have started with what we refer to as the 8 principles for responsible development, deployment, and operation of artificial intelligence. These are 8 principles that apply primarily for delivery teams that consist of cross-functional backgrounds to ensure that they're at least conscious of things that they're doing throughout the machine learning project lifecycle. Things like human augmentation, bias evaluation, explainability by justification, etc., etc. Those are things that we have structured to ensure it can be adopted by individuals or teams when running the projects from a more practical perspective to ensure that they can evaluate things. Because one of the things that we believe is that it's not about embedding ethics into the algorithms, because that is ultimately absolutely impossible. What is required is to introduce those best practices, those ethics, those principles through process and through human touch points. What are the specific individuals that need to have a perspective, an opinion, a review at which point in time? So as you're developing your solutions, as you're exploring these solutions, having these things in mind will be quite important. What is the trust and the privacy, the potential security risks? How can this be exploited if we do it, right? And that's important, especially when you're dealing with data that is as critical as patient data, NHS data, or even if it's things like social media data that people have thought, well, how is my Facebook data going to, potentially be harmful? We have seen that in the last few political situations, right? I think that in itself reflects how important your data is, and everyone's as a collective. We have actually also started creating a set of open source projects that you can go off and contribute yourself. One of them is a list of all of the production libraries that you can use for machine learning, and these are available, within this link, and we're going to share the slides later. And similarly, this is taking it from a technical standpoint, but we also have put together another list that tries to map all of the different types of guidelines related to ethical frameworks, ethical checklists, etc. Which again you can actually go and check. That's in the Institute's GitHub, which is at github.com/ethicalML. If there's something that is not there, you can actually submit and contribute. You can get involved. So that's one of the core benefits. We have also done a few other things like procurement frameworks that can be adopted by industries as a whole and industry suppliers and players to ensure that the way that they do projects are in the best practices and within following some of these best principles. This is basically following a machine learning maturity model, which I'm not going to dive into because I don't want you to fall asleep. But at the same time, it's definitely one of the areas that is available there for you to actually go and read if you think this is as interesting as we do. And just to kind of finish off, I want to just run through a very brief case study that will showcase what does actual algorithmic bias look like. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take a domain expert evaluation process where people are going to want to automate the approval or rejection of loans. So if you go and apply for a loan, they want to introduce an algorithm, let's say, to either approve or reject it automatically, right? And what we're going to be looking at is how algorithmic bias is actually introduced in this area. And we're going to follow the usual data science structure. You know, in this case, we have the training data, the transforming data for input of the model, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you know, I am very conscious that I'm covering a lot of these different topics very, very fast. We actually have, half an hour, 1 hour sessions on each of the chunks in YouTube, or on each of the chunks of this presentation. So if you're curious on one of these areas, or you want to understand more about a specific area like this use case, you'll be able to actually dive into it and learn a bit more about it. So now in terms of the process that we're going to be doing, so I'm not going to go into that much detail, but the way that it's going to look like is we have a bunch of examples of people that have submitted loans and whether the loans have been approved or rejected. We're going to actually build a model from this data set, which basically will tell us whether the models are, whether a new loan is approved or rejected. That's basically what it's going to do. As a data scientist, you would first run this through a model, and what you would obtain is an accuracy. And in this case, when we run it for the first time, we would see that, you know, we get a 99% accuracy, right? And you would think, oh my God, right? So I trained the model and straight away I got 99% accuracy. That's amazing. I should be able to put it in production, right? But when we actually look at the results and break them down into a little bit more insight, we would be able to see that the results in themselves were actually just rejecting loans, right? So then there's the question of, well, how could we get 99% accuracy if the model is only rejecting loans? And this perhaps could be a use case that you could have in reality. The reason here is because the data that we used to train it actually consisted of mostly rejected loans, with only about 5 or 10 loans that were actually approved, right? So in that case, if the model was to just reject all the models, it would still get a 99% accuracy, right? So in that perspective, it's important, it's critical to make sure that you understand what your actual data looks like. Because in production, we can see that there are supposed to be some models that were supposed to actually, you know, be approved. So in this case, we basically trained a model that just rejects all loans. And in that case, it's a loan that is currently discriminating to everybody, right? In that case, in this specific case. So in essence, what you see in terms of algorithmic bias often tends to be introduced like that. And of course, this is a very, very simplified use case, but ultimately, you know, I encourage you, we have another talk where we actually dive into details and we cover the data science behind it, but, you know, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into that. But I do encourage you to have a look and check out all of those things. So with that said, you know, I've covered quite a lot of content in a very, very short period of time. I encourage you more than anything to, again, you know, go and bother the mentors, ask us questions. Of course, you know, try to explore as much as you can, and then, of course, have fun. But I'll be available all weekend, so feel free to, you know, drop me a message on Discord, and, you know, I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. So with that said, I'll pause there, and I'll pass it over to Sarah and Elena so that they can dive into the follow-up or questions if there's time.
Thank you, Alejandro, for that amazing talk. It's been very interesting, and just a little insight to what ethics and within AI actually means. So we will definitely be putting your presentation slides on Discord, probably in the sources place within the next 10 minutes. So if you guys want to go and look at his presentation again, feel free to do so.
And I'm looking at any questions. I'm not seeing any questions just yet. But I do know, Alejandro, you are on Discord already, and they know how to find you. So if they have any questions, they will go to the Ask an Expert channel. So there are no questions that I am seeing from any of the participants just yet. So if you have any questions, do please ask, because I'm looking at WhatsApp messages at the moment. Any questions, Alejandro? I'm happy to take live right now. Okay, a few people have commented that it wasn't very clear. And a little bit fuzzy, but hopefully the recording will be a bit clearer. And
we will be uploading.
Yeah, we will upload
the recording.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, Alejandro, thank you so much as ever. So no questions yet.
Thank you.
I have seen you already respond with a lot of participants in Discord. And as ever, we're so grateful for your time and for joining us today and introducing such an incredibly important topic. So the question of ethics will be, as I said, highlighted every day throughout the 9 days, most likely for the next 4 or 5 days. And we'll have a lot of incredible people joining us to speak about different aspects of ethics and why these are really important. So to all participants out there, I hope you have taken away something very valuable and important, and that is really to look into the impact of whatever it is that you are developing, that we encourage you to develop code responsibly and think about the impact of that code. So I'm going to let you go, Alejandro, and we've got Freddie, who I would like to welcome, because Freddie will be our next speaker, and he will be talking about what's AI and what's not AI with his AI Mythbuster talk, which I know he tried to record, and he struggled to send it to us. So we're having Freddie live. Freddie, welcome. How are you? Please unmute yourself and say hi.
Hello there. Hello, everyone.
Hi, how are you, Freddie? Thank you so much for trying to send the recording. I know it was very, very hard, but it probably was a long workshop or talk you wanted to record. So we are going to brave in and have you live. And let's hope it all goes really well, like it went smoothly with Alejandro. So thank you for joining us. Let us hope. Are you going to try and play your talk, or?
I'm going to give it a shot. Just if anyone says they can't hear anything, we'll switch to live immediately.
Okay, let's try this, and we're going to the reaction. Go.
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Hello, everyone. We have a joke in our scientific community. The joke is that if you understand it, then it's no longer AI. You see, for the vast majority of our history, AI has lied in the realm of science fiction, right? And as a result, it's now still really hard to shed off that air of mysticism that it usually comes with. And many articles you'll find many articles that talk about what AI will do very soon in the future, and they also talk about its potential. But it's very rare that you'll find some really informative article about what AI can do right now. And it's even rarer to find articles about what AI cannot do. So my big hope with this talk is to put my little pebble in filling that gap. So the answer is that all of these three systems, they work by a very simple principle. And that one is that similar people will do similar things. So more specifically, what do I mean by that is that Netflix and Amazon, the way they make money is by recommending you products that are liked by people who are similar to you. And similarity here means something very specific. So you and I, as consumers, we are defined by what we're buying online. So if we buy very similar things, thereby we are similar consumers. So if we have very similar profiles, you are very likely to buy something else that I have already bought. So by that logic, then Netflix is going to recommend you that movie, or Amazon is going to recommend you that product for you to buy. And similarity here is not a binary thing. It's not like you're either similar or you're not. Similarity comes in degrees. Now, human brains are really good at telling when two things are similar or not. But we have to ask ourselves, how did we attain this ability, if not by experience through many other examples of things that are not similar? And this key question brings me to machine learning and reality check number 0. Machine learning says when something is too hard to define, like similarity, then learn it by example. Now, machine learning is a very trendy type of AI that was born out of the fusion of several applied mathematics disciplines. Statistics, computer science, operational research, list goes on. But the attribution game is not what's important here. What's important is that machine learning developed its own distinct culture based off that simple mantra. Now, that mantra, learned by example, captures only one aspect of human intelligence. The paradigm of learning by example doesn't really explain abilities like ingenuity, our ability to invent. Doesn't explain things like generalizability, our ability to excel at any new task. Doesn't explain few-shot learning, generalizing with very few examples. Few-shot continual learning, being able to generalize with few examples, but all the time. And doesn't explain things like causal reasoning, our ability to understand cause and effect, and therefore being able to deduce the laws of nature. And it doesn't explain consciousness. I'm not even going to go there. So we think that for any AI to be worthy of the title general AI, it needs to satisfy at least this criteria. And right now, we're very far from achieving those things. So we are 6 minutes in, and we've managed to bust our very first myth. So time for myth numero uno. An AI is a machine. Machines don't make mistakes. Therefore, an AI is always right. Seeing here is a video game called Coast Runner 7. And this game is famous in the machine learning community because it was the subject of an experiment. In machine learning, there is an even smaller subfield called reinforcement learning. And in your typical reinforcement learning problem, the goal is to train some virtual AI agent, in this case, the boat, to excel in their virtual environment, here, the water racetrack. And now, in reinforcement learning, does that by giving the agent little treats, little rewards every time it does something well, something good. Sounds simple, right? But the catch is that we have to define what is meant by good here. So what would the model do if we told it to maximize the amount of points that it wins from the game? After all, that's the very definition of a good gamer, right? What could go wrong here? You remember those green little thingies that the boat collects? Well, turns out that these thingies give the boat the maximum number of points you can get from any collectible. Now, if you speed up the video, you will notice that the agent has literally found a loophole by circling around the same collectibles so that it can maximize its score endlessly. So what went wrong here? Well, we set the wrong goal. Myth number 2. We should replace doctors and experts with machine learning models because humans make mistakes whereas machines don't. Well, this is kind of related to the previous myth, but what could go wrong in this case? What could go wrong is that we could use the wrong data. So here you have a tweet by one of the most famous machine learning scientists. This man is Geoffrey Hinton, so he's one of the pioneers of deep learning, and he's also the recipient of the Turing Award from 2019. And in his tweet, he's saying, suppose you have cancer and you have to choose between a black box AI surgeon that cannot explain how it works, but has a 90% cure rate, and a human surgeon with an 80% cure rate. Do you want the AI surgeon to be illegal? Now, my take on this is that obviously Geoffrey is not advocating for surgeons to be replaced yet, but I do suspect part of him kind of expects that to happen at some point. But the point of his tweet is really to drive the debate, to drive the conversation, for people to express their worries, their opinions around AI. And my take on this is that, if I was, let's say, a stakeholder in this bet, I don't know anything about how representative my body is of the cases to which the AI has been trained on. So the bet really depends on the stakeholder, right? As if I was a patient, then my risk is more complicated than just something that depends on accuracy alone. But let's say if I was a regulator, if I was a policymaker, then, according to those success rates, I would say that I'm listening. Myth number 3. Data is the new oil. Oh boy. Or data is a commodity. Now, I can see where this is coming from. This quote originates back to a Wired article back in 2014. This is back in the day before the deep learning revolution, before we thought AI can be really successful as it is today. The reason why companies like Google and Amazon and Netflix are now some of the richest companies in the world is because of data. So in that sense, I can see why there is a little bit of truth to that statement. But data cannot be seen as a commodity. So why do I say that? So first of all, oil is a commodity, right? And by the definition of a commodity means that it's some good that whose value it does not depend on who produces it. And the same is also for electricity and other forms of energy. But in the case of the data is not equitable. It does depend who produces it. There are so many factors that decide the value of the data. Obviously, some data are noisier than others. There is a lot of energy that needs to be put to clean data, to store data, to organize it, to structure it, and to curate it properly. So, and this is not to mention, issues around privacy. Also, some data should never be accessible. And a similar quote to that has been also popularized by another famous deep learning pioneer called Andrew Ng. To some of you, Andrew Ng might also be known through Coursera fame. And Andrew Ng was, he's actually a very popular machine learning educator. It's because of him that, hundreds of thousands of students around the world have learned about machine learning, and later on went to have careers in machine learning and deep learning and so forth. And actually, I was actually using his Coursera course back in the day when I was a grad student. So I'm a big fan of his, but I'm not a big fan of his saying that AI is the new electricity. And for the very same reasons that I'm not a fan of data is the new oil. For similar reasons, AI cannot be seen as a commodity. AI is a model, so the quality of the predictions from the model, from the AI, does rely on the quality of the data. We have a pretty famous saying in data science, which is garbage in, garbage out. So if you feed a model garbage, it's only going to give you back garbage. It's going to give you back garbage predictions. So I would say this is busted. More like oil is a new data. Myth number 4, AI will steal all of our jobs. Now, this is perhaps the most legit of the myths in this presentation. And that's because it will actually make many jobs obsolete. That's a fact, and it's already happening. But the truth is more nuanced than that. If a particular industry is automated to some extent, then every company in that industry is motivated to save money by automating some of its processes, right? But the same company will also want to reinvest that capital back into its business, as long as they want to stay ahead of the competition, right? That also means that a company might refine their services and products, or they might invest that money into training their workforce, or create new, more complex jobs that are predicated on the latest wave of automation. The impact of the job market in the end of the day will very much depend on the time it takes for the average worker to learn the new skills necessary. So I have to admit here that I wouldn't be much of a myth buster if I didn't bust this myth, but I have to admit that I am kind of attacking a straw man here. It's very rare the case that I hear someone say AI will steal all of our jobs. The reality is that AI will steal some jobs, but only the ones that we care about in the short run. So I left the most important myth for the end. Myth number 5. Some people say an AI has no emotions, therefore it cannot be racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic. But it can happen. It can happen intentionally. So 4 years ago, for example, Microsoft did this experiment where they unleashed a chatbot called Tay into Twitter. The hope was that Tay would learn by interacting with the humans on Twitter. And boy, she did. In that sense, the experiment was a massive success. But what Microsoft didn't foresee was that 4chan would catch wind of the experiment, and then it was open season for Tay. In the same day, Tay turned into an angry neo-Nazi advocating for ethnic cleansing and sexually harassing people, and Microsoft instantly took her down. But arguably, it's the unintentional biases of AI that can do the most harm in our society. In 2018, Amazon had to scrap an AI recruiting tool that was biased against women's CVs for tech-related jobs. In 2019, Apple Card was investigated after receiving complaints on gender discrimination. But to this day, our best facial recognition algorithms still struggle to recognize black faces equally. In the case of gender discrimination, both systems have been trained predominantly with male-heavy data sets. In the case of racial discrimination, computer vision algorithms were trained with predominantly non-black faces. So if you think about it, it's mostly men that apply for tech-related roles and for bigger credit card limits. I'm not making any excuses here. I mean, that's just the facts. The problem here is not an AI problem. It's really a human problem. Both cases lack proper due diligence, right? For the unbiasing of the data, which I remind you is not a commodity, okay? So, if a corporate representative says they will argue that applications do not see gender, that's not enough. Machine learning algorithms are really good at picking up subtle cues that are invisible to the human eye. So, for instance, many women will at some point in their careers take maternity leave, right? That employment gap is a telltale sign for an AI that the CV is most likely coming from a woman. Similarly, the shopping behavior in a credit card statement is indicative of someone's gender. Fairness in AI is a technical subfield of AI that has matured from an academic curiosity to a study which is important for industrial applications. But the responsibility doesn't lie solely on their engineering teams, which are mostly comprised, unfortunately, of white and Asian men in ML teams. It lies on the companies to view AI as more than just a moneymaker. It lies on policymakers to foresee and regulate unethical uses of AI. It lies on your teachers to demonstrate to you socially positive uses of AI. And finally, it lies on you to own AI and not demonize or put it on a pedestal. I hope you have an amazing learning experience during this hackathon. Thank you for listening and stay safe.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that, Freddie. That's quite a lot of information. I really loved it. I don't regret that you decided to show this talk from your screen with all those visual effects and everything. It's fantastic. If you could send this to us, we're going to try and upload it onto the YouTube channel so that they could actually see the raw video, because I think it's amazing. I love it. And many people have heard this talk already during our Girls in AI hackathon in March. And everyone absolutely loved it. So obviously I was then in Paris running a hackathon in Paris, and I was asking everyone for feedback. And the one thing everyone was commenting on is your talk, which is of course why I really wanted to bring you to this hackathon and ask you to do this again for us. So I'm really grateful. I know there is a little debate happening, some discussion happening in YouTube. So Freddie, would you like to read the comments and maybe make some comments? Yeah. So as you can tell, I don't know whether you've checked. So they are definitely debating about whether AI is the new oil, data's new oil or not. So they're making lots of interesting comparisons. And if somebody asks a question, I haven't seen any pop up just yet. I will definitely pass it on to you, but some very curious comments. Sarah, did you see any questions asked? Sarah, you're muted.
Pardon? Are you asking me?
No, I'm asking Sarah. Okay, I can't seem to hear her. We seem to have lost her sound, but no, we don't have any sound from Sarah. Okay, so Freddie, so we have young people from across so many different cities in this hackathon. They are all going to be tackling some really, really difficult challenges. What tips could you offer to them? What can they do over the next, 8-9 days, to ensure that whatever it is that they're developing is actually solving a problem? And we know that AI is not able to solve all problems related to COVID or unrelated to COVID. So with all of the hackathons that I run, I wouldn't like to assume and to focus on let's find a problem that AI necessarily can solve, because I think this will be a very limited approach. So my approach is usually find a problem, solve a problem. If we can demonstrate that there is some application of AI and data science in that problem, great. I think it's great that they're exploring this kind of technologies and they want to learn more, but I wouldn't necessarily like them to try and apply, AI into everything that they do. I want them to really take a human-centered design approach and understand the problem and empathize and try and solve the problem first. What do you think about it, and what tips and suggestions do you have to offer to these young people? Some of them are, it's really the first time for them. I don't know whether you remember yourself, how old you were when you started exploring AI, but what would you tell them?
Yeah, there's a multi-sided question. So I guess the first thing I want to address is kind of like the strategy you want to take on your projects. And the one I'm really fond of is actually a tweet I recently bumped into, is the idea that you don't want to do an MVP. MVP is the minimum viable product that most startups do. They start by creating something grandiose that is more like a demo and is very incomplete and is just meant to impress the judges or whatever. It is more important to do the simple, lovable, and complete, which is, like make something really simple that just works 100% and then iterate on that. And then make a new version of that, something more complicated that is a little bit more complicated but works 100%. And AI projects tend to have this kind of tendency to, this kind of MVP curse, right? They're tackling too big of a problem and then they work on a very narrow domain of the data. So I would suggest just be mindful of that idea of the simple, lovable, and complete across the whole hackathon. And then there was the other question they were asking around, I'm blanking. What was the, can you jog my memory, please? I don't know.
So I was just wondering whether you have any suggestions to those who are making their first steps onto this journey. You remember yourself, you explored on on that journey. What were your concerns, or what is it that you have learned on your journey that you feel could be beneficial for the young people to learn now?
Right. Well, I would say there's a lot of resources out there, and like too many blog posts, too many Medium articles. Like everyone and their cat is writing an article nowadays. So it's really easy to kind of like lose your focus. So I would just like stay close to trusted sources. There's AI is very hacky. There's not so much of a software engineering mindset, but more kind of like a hacky. Well, I mean, yeah, I get it. You're in a hackathon after all, but you do want to kind of follow good principles to, because you're going to do not a 2-day hackathon, you're going to do a 1-week hackathon. So you want to develop your project with a structural mindset. You want to do it carefully so that being mindful of your teammates, always being aware of what's happening in the project, so they can always catch up. And never it's always preferable to be generous with your time to allow them to learn than to leave them behind so you can focus on your own bit. I think you will walk away with a much richer experience if you realize that yes, you have developed your technical skills, but you have also developed your interpersonal skills. Trust me on that. That's more important.
I agree with you. In fact, I am receiving direct messages from some of the young people on this hackathon asking me whether I could move them or swap them because, the conversations are just not happening in the way they expected them to happen in their teams. And it is quite a challenge to have a conversation live, let alone in the virtual world. So it is quite challenging. Some are finding it more challenging than the others, which is why when they just got onboarded, we advise them to play Pokemon, to really play and gel together. So, but it's only day one. It's only day one. And Freddie, obviously, I know you told me it's been a long time since you played games in a gaming environment. So you're very welcome to come and join us. Before I let you go, I have another question.
Yeah, we do have a few more questions.
We have a few more questions. Can I ask one more question from me? Because hopefully that is something that will be of interest. And then you can ask him one or two questions. So Freddie, I want to know what really inspired you into AI. Can you tell me, what is it that you were interested in when you were a teenager? And what made you go into data science and AI in the first place? So we have some teenagers there who are 16, 17, some older young people, and some of the younger ones, 12, 13, and everyone is obviously discovering and learning on this journey. But I think they would want to know your story. How did it all begin? Why AI and not something else?
Yes, I think it's very much because it had that air of mysticism around it. Because I was a big fan of science fiction. I was a kind of a little nerd in my own way, playing computer games at the same time, and I was all very much into like popular science magazines and whatnot, and I always read about what AI is going to do, where's the potential of AI, and it's just like we had this kind of air of fantasy, mysticism, this magical sense. There's like, I want to be a part of it. I want to be able to shape that. There was no other scientific discipline at the time that created you this sense of awe, right? At least for me personally. And at the time also I was happening to be quite into like coding, and it was only when I was doing my undergrad actually that I decided to do post-grad. But I knew what I wanted to do. I was like, I want to go to Edinburgh. It's like, because that had just a good reputation. I don't know why. It didn't occur to me to go anywhere else. I just wanted to go to Edinburgh. It's like I get one application and I got in. That's like I didn't hedge my bets or anything. It's just like one in. But I got in because I was coming from quite a low kind of class university, but I had an internship experience under my belt, and that practical experience was pivotal for kind of getting me into the path of academia, and then back into the industry, and yeah.
Fantastic. All right, Sarah, do we have one or two questions that we could take from our lively, chatty participants that I know are very actively involved on YouTube? What do they want to know?
Of course. So just to start a question, we got one which is asking, what is deep learning for you? And actually clarify what the word deep is.
Okay, well, let me start from the second part. The deep in the deep learning is kind of allowing everything to be separated from old machine learning, which is, I guess, what we could call the shallow machine learning, right? And like before deep learning was really successful, most of the models were, let's say, you might use SVM. So people who are familiar with this kind of technical terms, SVM is support vector machine, or like things that are every machine learning algorithm kind of, there was this 2-day stage project where first you're engineering the features yourself by using your own expertise, and that this used to happen always in computer vision. Computer vision was all about how can we engineer manually the right features, and then once we figure out the right features, then we can learn some simple linear classifiers or whatnot to do whatever prediction task, like classification, regression, whatever. Segmentation. But then to answer your first question, what the deep and the deep learning allows you to do is that you can just get rid of all that manual feature engineering and allow the model to do it by itself. Allow the model to decide what are the right features it needs to use to optimize whatever loss function it needs to optimize, or whatever the learning task at hand. And Now the depth is, once you have that in place, this kind of full automation, full end-to-end kind of learning, then the depth allows the model to learn in increasing, sort of like to have a variable. Okay, let me take a step back. All right. So there are certain features that the model learns in let's say the first layer. And then, you can think of it as like the model has already learned those. And as far as the other layers are concerned later, the input features are like, let's say, the handcrafted engineered features. So think of a deep model as kind of a nested neural networks, right? But every layer is sort of like a smaller model. So you've got like the early features kind of like feeding into the later features, and every mini model is kind of building its own representation on top of the previous representations. So there, in that sense, you have a hierarchical representation. So because the low-level features are going to be useful for a lot of things, like maybe like in images you have edges, corners, shapes, or whatnot. But as you go deeper and deeper, you find more abstract representations, maybe representing things like faces or shapes or like objects, or maybe, it can be things that are maybe like for us humans, just don't really make much intuitive sense, but it doesn't very much make for the machine. And that also poses a challenge for us because we're still kind of learning to speak the language of the machines. We don't really know how to interpret what they're telling us once they've learned the task.
Great, I hope that answers the question.
So we have a question that we're combining. Sarah, I don't know whether you want to
so we have one question, which is, how can bias be used as an advantage to change communities and societies, and to make sure
can you
that
repeat the question, please?
how can we use biases to make an advantage of it to change communities and societies that we live in, however ensuring that it is safe and it's fair?
Let me
so the question is
very quickly, Freddie. As a society, how can we make sure that the AI tools we use are fair? And how, if at all, can bias be used as an advantage rather than a hindrance in different communities?
I see, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, let me start by ways that we can improve things for not oppressing vulnerable populations, right? Because I guess the better question is, how can we detect use cases, instances of oppression? In the end of the day, we all want everyone to benefit from AI. So I think it's more important to learn to identify the dangers, right? Once we're good at that, then we won't have to worry about explicitly using AI for good, because if we're able to prevent abuses of AI, then kind of like implicitly that means that you're doing AI for good as well. That's kind of a rough idea, but to answer to be more specific, I think a good start would be on a cultural level. Like the way we form teams right now in companies is very male dominated, for one. As I mentioned, it's just a fact. Like if you look at the numbers, most teams are comprised of white and Asian men. And there's nothing wrong with that intrinsically. But the thing is that when you don't have the cultural diversity, it's just a matter of time until you're going to reach some corner case you didn't think about, because you will not grow up to be sensitive to that.
Fantastic.
I think that's a great response.
So, all right. I don't think we have any more questions, but I'm having a very lively conversation here with Julian Cornebis, who is sending his best regards to you. So he's listening to your talk as well. Fantastic. So Freddie, thank you so much for your time. We are going to let you go, but you are one of our favorite mentors and speakers, and we would really love to have you back again, either during our AI Accelerator or during any other upcoming hackathon. But I'm really grateful you have raised the issue of diversity. And this is something I've spoken to the teams during my Ask Me Anything session, explaining to them why I built the teams in a way where we have boys and girls and ethnically diverse and different abilities and whatnot, because it's very important that we build teams in a way where the output and the outcome of the product is representative of the makeup of whoever it is that they're building for, but at the same time, the team that is building it is very diverse. So thank you very much for making that point across. And we're going to let you go now, because I think we have we have taken advantage of your kindness and your time. But thank you. And we're going to have another speaker who is now waiting to be admitted. We're going to do a catch up with Eddie. So stay tuned for another 10 minutes whilst we speak to Eddie. Thank you, Freddie. Speak to you soon. Okay.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye. All right. So, Eddie, welcome back.
Hello. How are you doing?
We're very well. And how are you?
I'm good.
My goodness, look at you, Eddie.
Back on holiday. Still back on holiday.
So, Eddie, I expected you to be exhausted and tired. 3 hours of work across 24 teams. My goodness.
It's actually quite windy here, so I can't always hear you too well. But yeah, what's amazing is running through all the different teams and seeing where they are and the energy that's happening. It's mind-boggling sometimes.
Okay, tell me what has been happening, and where do you think the teams are? What shall we do to help them further? Because you have, we have until 6 o'clock, so 2 hours until our next and final talk of the day. They will be exhausted by then, and we know that. So we have the most incredible design thinkers with us, and you know who they are. I'm really grateful if you are listening to this talk and you're not in your rooms or at home taking a break. We are so grateful that you are doing this work, because we know design thinking is not easy when it comes to working offline, so let alone online. So Eddie, what was it like?
I mean, challenging is a good word to use, isn't it, in some scenarios. The teams have mostly have run through quite a lot of the process and have found quite a lot of interesting aspects that they want to work on. So every team was sent the sheet to fill in, so we can see a design overview. And just taking a quick look at that, there's teams that are looking at the elderly and vulnerable. There's teams that are looking at doctors and nurses in isolated locations. There's teams looking to help with teachers. And there's one there for young people aged 18 and above. So there's a real range of different projects going on. And it's really interesting to see how different people are working together in those groups, and how the mentors have really sort of helped gel some of that. But and some of the groups are so dynamic, it's just, you're buzzing every time you drop into the channel. It's like, wow, what something major has happened. So that's really exciting. It's kind of addictive just to flick through all the different channels. It's like channel hopping, and yeah, it's going on really well. I mean, some of the work that's been done is absolutely amazing. So we didn't expect you to finish all of this today. In fact, because it's a process that you can actually go on for several days doing this. Yeah. Remember what Einstein said, we spend more time looking at the problem and testing things than we do actually building the solution in the end. Okay, so it's all about going through the process again and again. So don't stop thinking that this is a sort of, you've got an end point. Really, the end point is really just building the pitch and putting that together. The projects can always move forward. And even after the hackathon is finished, you can continue doing this.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So what will be the next steps? They have a couple of hours left until 6 o'clock. What would you advise that they do right now? Because for me, usually at this stage, unless you think they should spend some more time on this process, usually at this stage, we ask tech mentors to get involved just to do what we would call sanity check, just to kind of choose what kind of tools would be appropriate to help them develop the solution that they're trying to build for that specific problem. But then I always recommend don't all 3 or 4 of you jump into, you know, conversations with tech mentors, but please do still spend some time on, you know, developing that problem statement so that there is 1 or 2 people still engaged with design thinking mentors, because remember, we probably won't have as many of them tomorrow or over the next 9 days, but then maybe 1 person or 2 people could already start talking to their tech mentors to try and define what those tools might look like, whether they will be choosing specific technologies and what that next step should look like. What do you think, Eddie?
Yeah, what to do is really sort of ask the tech mentors, you know, what sort of things can we do for this scenario? And then let them and actually talk through them your idea and how you shaped it through the process. So give them a sort of an overview of how you got to the point you've got to, and then they'll much better understand what technologies, and also tell them which technology you're familiar with, so that will help in their decision making process of which technologies will work best for that team.
Fantastic. In addition, just a quick point. If you had to put together a to-do list with a 3-step process for the teams to do on every day to continue thinking about design thinking, what would those 3 points be?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first aspect would be just to talk with the team and actually go around, and every individual will say, I think we're on the right track, or we're not quite, and we need to just rejig or reframe what we're doing, and actually go through the process again, just to make sure that everyone's on board. So I'd spend the first 20 minutes each day just making sure that everyone is comfortable with what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then the third thing would be just to really ask for help where you need it. And don't be afraid. People will want to help you from all different scenarios, and so that's really critical. People would just love to come in and go, hey, this is exactly what you need, and I found it for you, or I need a data set, and where do I get a data set? And someone will go, oh, I've got one here, and it will just, you know, the more you reach out, the more people will give you.
Exactly.
Perfect.
So asking for help is very, very important. So if you're still tuned in, which we hope you are, because we're giving some really, really valuable advice for you all. So if you have got something you're stuck on, or a question or anything, please ask for help. This is a very important skill that I've had to learn, and every single one of us have had to learn, really asking for help. So please go to the relevant channel, whether it's speaking to experts or tech mentors or design thinkers. Go to their channels or ask in general and tag the relevant people. But please ask for help. Don't be just stuck and wondering what's happening. What am I meant to do? You know, ask for help and you will get it, because every single mentor in that Discord server, they're all dedicated to helping you. They are there for you. They're there to guide you. They're there to make sure whatever you produce is going to change the world. So they are there to help you. So, all right, fantastic.
And they're going to learn from you as well. They are definitely going to learn from you as well. So it's not just you know, it's always a two-way thing.
Yes, exactly. We've had so much feedback from mentors who are actually learning from you. So it is a two-way street, as Eddie have just pointed out, and mentors are learning from you. And you will hear them sort of on Twitter and everywhere else actually mentioning this very soon. So I'm just waiting to see whether Shuba can join us, because I really wanted to introduce our American host. So I think that
just whilst we wait,
yeah.
Guys who are still listening to the live, like, you don't have to go listen or ask for help through just the Discord. Like, get on Twitter, tweet at people that you think could be relevant, use Facebook, LinkedIn, all of these platforms, so you can get more of a general idea and a bit more of an diverse idea. So I'd really recommend doing that.
Absolutely. Yes, be bold. If you're looking for some APIs or data sets or whatnot, and you know who holds them, go on Twitter and ask for them. I do remember we had teenagers develop an Alexa skill for Etsy, and they literally went ahead and started sending tweets and messages and LinkedIn invitation messages to CEOs and directors of Etsy, asking them whether they could, approve their API registration and whatnot. So be bold. If you need help, ask for it in Discord. If nobody can help you in Discord, go out on Twitter and everywhere else. So with this in mind, we have Shuba here. Thank you so much for joining us. I wasn't sure whether that was you or not. So everyone who are joining us from Latin America and Americas in general, please say hello to your host, Shuba. She is going to be hosting and helping you when I am asleep, because clearly I cannot be awake 24/7. So if anyone has got any issues or questions and I am not there, and I will do my best to stay until midnight as I do, but beyond that, there is a point when my brain stops functioning and someone else has to take over. And that person who will take over is going to be Shuba. Shuba, say hi to us.
Hello, everybody. Great to be part of this amazing event. And Elena, you do need your sleep, so I'm happy to help. A little bit of background about myself. So I have essentially a mom of a teenager and wanted her to get involved in AI, and hence got into the field and ended up developing a real passion for the technology and really the immense potential that it has. So that's how I got involved, and then found Elena, and the rest is history. So so thrilled to be part of this event, and happy to help in any shape or form that I can.
Fantastic. And Shuba is based in Atlanta. So anyone else who is in that time zone, so please do speak to Shuba if none of us is at home, because I've realized probably a little bit late that myself and the rest of my team are all based here, BST time, this time zone. And I desperately wanted to find somebody who could support you and help you. So there are some phenomenal mentors who will be helping Shuba as well. And we have about 5 teams, I believe, who are based in the Americas time zone. Not as many as in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and UK, but still we want to make sure that everyone has the right content. And so 4:30, literally in 15 minutes, is when Shuba is going to kick off the live stream based on the playlist that we have created based on the content that we played since morning. So Shuba, I will be there to help you. And at 6 o'clock, we have Eddie doing design thinking workshop again for the Americas. Eddie, are you ready to do this again?
I'm always ready. I've still got the pineapple. I've still got the pineapple. The pineapple is still alive. It's okay.
That's brilliant. Fantastic. So Shuba, you will get as much help as we can possibly all offer you. And I think it's going to be amazing. So everyone, please go back to your channels in Discord. Let's get back to work. And we will see you at 6 o'clock back here again to listen to our last keynote. We're going to end the day on a high note, and it's going to be phenomenal. Thank you so much. We will see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.
Everyone.